I'm Jan Howell and welcome back to my channel. Some of you may already know how much I love making things from upcycled clothing. In this DIY sewing tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can make a cozy pair of slippers using upcycled sweaters. These crossover slippers are one of my favorite slippers to make up. I have several different patterns out there for slippers, and the crossover slipper is really quite simple to make. It's unique and very comfortable to wear. They're lined, and the pattern comes in sizes from a youth up to an adult extra large. And the color combinations are endless. You can add a little custom tag on the back if you want to, just to give it a unique look, which is kind of fun. Make sure you watch the whole video because I'm going to show you some different binding techniques using fleece that you probably haven't seen before. And I'll show you several different types of fabric that you can use on the sole of the slipper. If you're liking my content, please like and share my videos, and be sure to click on that subscribe button if you haven't already. So without any further ado, let's get started. If you haven't watched my video tutorial showing how to felt and use wool sweaters, gold sweater projects, you may want to watch that. I will put the link in the description below for that video and the link that you can download and print the pattern. The items you'll need for your project is the downloaded and printed pattern, a pair of fabric scissors, and a pair of paper scissors, some kind of tape to put your pattern together with, and you'll need some pins and a needle and thread. You'll need 8 safety pins, and of course your upcycled and felted sweaters ready to go. Now you can make the slippers all the same color, or you can make the tops 2 different colors. And you'll also need some fleece. You can use upcycled or recycled fleece from an old jacket or something, and you'll need some pieces for the bottom. I will show you different kinds of material to use for the sole, and we'll go over that in the next section as well. Now it's time to choose the different sweaters for and colors of sweaters for your slippers. You will want to choose a type of sweater that's not too dense and thick. Sometimes when you felt and shrink up a sweater, it can get really, really thick. You could use that maybe for the sole piece, but not for the top piece. The top pieces you want them to have a little bit of a stretch to them so that they can be cozy, but you don't want them to be too thin or else they'll really wear out fast. So just a kind of medium weight felted sweater is great with a little bit of stretch. You can also make the slipper tops out of polar fleece fabric. There are several options for the sole fabric of your slippers. So you can just simply use another piece of felted wool sweater. However, sometimes they do wear out a little bit more. If it's an adult, you might want to use something else. This is a fun piece of fabric to use on little kids' slippers, as it makes it doesn't make it slip. It's anti-slip fabric, and I will put the notes and the link to that where you can get that. Another simple thing to make the slippers non-slip is just simply using easy liner. You can use leather or suede. You can flip, and depending on however you want the feel, you can flip it over and use that. Also makes it very durable and helps with the non-slip. Leather and suede can be used. It is a little more tricky to use. It's a little more stiff and not as flexible to sew on, but I really enjoy sewing on leather and suede, as long as it's not a really thick piece, just a nice, comfortable, soft piece that's flexible. To make sure you're sewing up the right size slipper, let's measure your feet. So go ahead and place a measuring tape or ruler on the floor. Take your shoes and socks off and step onto the floor. Make sure the tip of the toes are at the end of the measuring tape, and take a book and pull it against the heel so that you can get an accurate reading. Note where the end of the book is and take that measurement to the chart on the pattern. Find the measurement and the size. If it errs on being too small or too big, it's better to go up a size. Go ahead and cut out your pattern on the indicated line and color for that size. Cut all your pieces out, making sure to cut out the notches. and leaving that extra space at the top of those pattern pieces. Once you have all your pieces cut out, go ahead and choose the binding piece that goes with the size and cut that out. Fold the pattern on the dotted lines and line up the dotted lines and place a piece of tape or a couple pieces of tape to secure that in place. Go ahead and fold. Just trim off all the excess bulk on the pattern pieces that might double over, and you're all set and ready to cut out your slippers. Once you've made your sweater selections, let's get ready to cut them out. We'll start by cutting out the bottom sole piece. Go ahead and take your fabric and lay it flat. Place your pattern on the fabric. Make sure, especially if you're using leather or suede, you want to maximize the fabric as much as possible. So get it close to the edge, pin it, and cut all the way around. Cut out, make sure you're cutting out the notches. And then you're going to take the pattern, this is really important, flip it over after you've removed the pins. Flip the pattern over and place on the fabric. So you get the left and the right side. Really important that you do that. Cut those out, remove the pins. And this is where you use the safety pins. We're going to be applying the safety pins to all the right sides of the pieces. That will help you keep things straight when we're putting things together. If you decide to use the non-slip fabric on the bottoms of your slippers, you will need to cut out a regular sole piece and then a set of the non-slip fabric. So, and then you'll stack the non-slip fabric on top of the sweater sole piece as if it were just one piece. Treat it just as one piece. And then when you're marking the right side with your safety pins, just put that on top of the non-slip surface. So the non-slip surface becomes the right side of the fabric. And proceed just as normal, using those two pieces and treating it as one piece. To cut out the top piece, take your pattern, again maximize your fabric. If you have grains or lines, you want to line up those lines on both pieces, but go ahead and place that on close to the edge as possible, pin it and cut it out. So once again, after you have it all cut out, that side, you're going to remove the pins and flip it over. Make sure you flip the pattern over, upside down, and put it back on the fabric. If your sweater piece does have lines, you want to make sure you line those up with the notches of the other piece, if you care about that. Pin it in place and then cut it out. Do the same thing for the other color of the top piece. If you're using another color, switch the sweaters out. If you're using the same color, just find another place on that sweater that you were using before. So cutting out the second color, go ahead and cut it out. Make sure you're again lining up notches or grains of the sweater. Remove the pins and flip the pattern over and cut out another. So you should have 4 top pieces, all with the safety pins applied to the right side. Really important. 4 pieces. And then you should have 4 pieces of the bottom part, of the bottoms. You'll have 2 for the lining and 2 of the bottom sole piece. So as you can see, I've used a teal color for the inside lining. You can also use fleece for the inside lining piece if you want to of the sole. Now we're going to cut out the binding for the slipper. Take your fleece fabric and let's find the stretch of the fabric. Really important that you're cutting it out on the stretch. So if you pull it to the side, it will stretch. If you pull it on the straight of the grain, it won't stretch. So we want to cut the fabric out on the stretch. So go ahead and fold your fleece in half and make sure it's lined up and even so the stretch will be not crooked. Take the end of the pattern that says to place on fold, place it against the fold, and pin it in place. So you're going to be cutting through 2 layers here. Once you've cut out one, we're going to cut out another. Again, place it on the fold. You can line it up right against the end. Again, maximizing your fabric, and cut another one out. To make a heel tag, it's optional, but if you want to put a cute little colored heel tag on the back of the slipper in the seam, go ahead and take another scrap of a color of your choice of the sweater and cut out 2 heel tags. So you can just fold it over, just make sure you just have 2 complete sets. There you go. Now it's time to gather your other sewing supplies, your sewing machine, and let's put it all together. Let's just take a moment to set up our machine. Make sure it's on a straight stitch and the length adjusted to 2.5 to 3. Thread your machine with a neutral color thread and also the bobbin. The seam allowance for the project will be 3/8 of an inch, which is usually the edge of your presser foot, unless you have a really narrow presser foot, and that might be 1/4 inch, so make sure you're sewing at 3/8 of an inch. First thing we're going to do is sew the heel seam and then apply the binding. Go ahead and open up your pieces and place the right sides together, different colors, just like this. Line up the back seam pieces and measure 1 inch from the top. Mark it with a pin. If you're adding a heel tab, go ahead and take your heel tab, fold it in half, and place it right at that 1 inch mark and pin it in place. Take it to the machine and we're going to sew that seam, back stitch at the front at the start, and then using the seam allowance just along the edge of your presser foot, or 3/8 of an inch, sew all the way down and back stitch at the end. Trim the seam, not real close, but just maybe half of the seam allowance, and then open it up. Do the same thing for the other side. Now we're going to go ahead and apply the binding. Now to tell which side of the binding is the right or the wrong side, go ahead and stretch it, the strip, and when it curls, the curling side will be, when it curls in, that is the wrong side. So the outside will be the place that curls. So go ahead and fold it in half and mark it with a pin. Place that half point on the back seam. Match up the end of the top piece with the binding strip and pin in place. And take the other end and match it up with the end and pin it in place. You don't really need to pin along the whole thing, because we're going to stretch and ease as we go. Now, as you notice that the binding is a lot shorter than the slipper piece. That is perfect. That's how it should be, because we want it to stretch a little bit and gather in as we sew. So go ahead and, using your seam allowance, backstitch at the top and begin to sew. Line up the edges and pull and ease in, stretch the top piece, which is your binding, as you sew, and it should fit really nicely. Remove your pins as you sew. You don't want to sew over the pins. Sewing all the way to the other side, easing and stretching as you sew. Backstitch at the end. And there, look how nice that looks. We're going to trim the seam allowance again making sure not to cut the seam, not real close, just getting that extra bulk off. Go ahead and open it up, and we're going to top stitch, we're going to fold that top piece over the edge and make sure that the seam allowance is sticking straight up and not down. So straight up and then fold and then pin in place. You're going to do that all along the edge. So this is a really nice technique to use on binding with using fleece, because fleece does not fray, so there's no need to fold it under or hem it. You can just cut it and it will not fray. This is a really fun and easy way to sew binding on things with fleece. So once you have that all pinned, we're going to go to the machine again, and we're going to stitch what I call stitching in the ditch. So we're going to stitch right in that crevice with the needle. So place the needle, back stitch, and remove your pins as you sew, and you'll be adjusting and tucking that binding under the whole time you're sewing to make sure that that's even and that seam allowance is poking out instead of underneath. Just nice and flat, you can tell. Take your time just to sew along in that crevice, stitching in the ditch. Continue to sew until you get to the other side and back stitch. Now, as you notice, there's going to be a lot of extra, not a lot, but there's some extra stuff. That's okay. We're going to take our scissors and to trim the edge, flat, lay your scissors kind of on the side and trim as close to that seam as you can without clipping the seam or clipping the back. So it's nice to lay the scissors flat, and look how nice the edge looks. So there you have it. Now we're going to take these pieces and get ready to sew it on to the sole. Now that you have the binding sewn on the slipper, we're going to sew the top part of the slipper to the sole piece. Let's just begin by sewing and pinning the top pieces together. Now you need to decide which color you want to be on top, which color you want to show the most. I'm going to choose the charcoal color sweater to be on top. Take the notch, the binding edge, match it up with the notch on the bottom part, and line up the center notch, pin in place, and the side arch side pinned in place. Now that arch side will have a square notch, and you'll match that. That will show you how to match that up with the sole piece in just a minute. So do that with the other side, matching up the notched edge with the binding edge, the top edge, center, and the side. Get your sole piece that has been marked with a safety pin, and we're going to place the notched edge, which is the inner arch piece, in line with the inner arch piece of the top piece. Make sure we're matching that up with the top color, square notch, really important. So the square notch is matching up, and the center top piece. So for this video, I'm just showing you partial with a sweater sole piece, which is great, and then the rest of the portion of the video I'm going to show with a suede piece. So we're just lining the sole piece up with the top piece. So we're going to be sewing through 3 layers at the top, so there'll be a little bit more bulk, but it's fine, and we'll just ease things in. Using a sweater sole is a little bit easier to ease in and stretch than a suede sole, but it is doable, and it will be fine. Let's go to the sewing machine and sew it in place. We're going to start sewing at the back heel seam on the sweater side. So back stitch, and just slowly we're going to be easing that top piece in with the sole piece, whether you're using a suede or leather or a sweater. will make a little bit of a difference between the ease of the stretch. So just take your time and just ease that top piece in, or stretch the bottom sole if it is a sweater piece. Make sure you're lining the edges up. Just take your time to remove pins, line things up. Sometimes you need to lift up that presser foot to adjust the fabric. And around that corner piece again, just easing in that fabric, spreading it out, or stretching that bottom piece if you need to, or if you can. We're just sewing to that top middle notch, and once you get there, just backstitch, and cut your thread. Flip it over and we'll sew the other half. Now we're going to be sewing on the slow piece side. Start at the back heel seam, backstitch, and now we're going to be still easing that top line, that top piece in with the sew piece. Take your time to go around the corners, lining up all the edges and removing pins as you sew. Go to where you ended the other backstitch, clip your threads. We are not going to clip or trim the seam allowance at this point. Let's get ready to sew the lining on now. I'm going to show you a tricky way to sew the lining into the slipper without being able to even see the seam. Take the right side of the lining piece. You're going to be placing that face down on top of the slipper top, making sure that that square notch is lined up with the square notches on the slipper. Line up the center point, the top center points, and the side notches. Now on the back, you'll just place that on top, lining up with the back heel notch, and just tuck the bulk of the fabric underneath. So we have a lot of stuff sandwiched in between the lining, but it'll all work out, lining up that square notch. That's really important that the square notch is lined up, or you're going to have twisting going on in the lining. We are going to leave about a 2-inch space open so that we can turn it inside out. So just mark that area with a pin. Go ahead and flip that over, and we're going to be sewing right along the previous seam line on the back of the slipper sole. So go to the area where the edge of the area where we're going to leave it open, backstitch, and following the seam line all the way around, sew on top of that. So we're stitching right on top of that previous seam line. Take your time to line up the edges and go around the curves. Following that same seam line on the sole piece. Just go around to the end where we're going to leave that place open, backstitch, and clip your thread, and go ahead and clip your seam allowance all the way around to remove that bulk. Go into the opening and start turning the slipper inside out. Now this is the fun part. You're going to see how this all comes together. Now you're going to maybe panic at first and think, oh, I've done it wrong. The lining piece is on the bottom. We need the sole piece on the bottom. And that's okay, and that's how it's supposed to be. We're going to turn it inside out again. So just kind of flip it inside out again till that lining, the slipper sole, is now on the outside. Stick your hand in there and push out the seams and push out the toes and the heel. I bet you can't wait to get your foot in there, right? Remove the safety pins. And go ahead and turn the other side inside out. So now that you have them turned inside out, we need to stitch the opening closed. I'm going to show you a tricky way to sew the lining into the slipper without being able to even see the seam. Take the right side of the lining piece. You're going to be placing that face down on top of the slipper top, making sure that that square notch is lined up with the square notches on the slipper. Line up the center point, the top center points, and the side notches. Now on the back, you'll just place that on top, lining up with the back heel notch, and just tuck the bulk of the fabric underneath. So we have a lot of stuff sandwiched in between the lining, but it'll all work out, lining up that square notch. And that's really important that the square notch is lined up, or you're going to have twisting going on in the lining. We are going to leave about a 2-inch space open so that we can turn it inside out. So just mark that area with a pin. Go ahead and flip that over, and we're going to be sewing right along the previous seam line on the back of the slipper sole. So go to the area where we're going to, the edge of the area where we're going to leave it open, backstitch, and following the seam line all the way around, sew on top of that. So we're stitching right on top of that previous seam line. Take your time to line up the edges and go around the curves. Following that same seam line on the sole piece. Just go around to the end where we're going to leave that place open, backstitch, and clip your thread, and go ahead and clip your seam allowance all the way around to remove that bulk. Go into the opening and start turning the slipper inside out. Now this is the fun part. You're going to see how this all comes together. Now you're going to maybe panic at first and think, oh, I've done it wrong. The slippers, the lining piece is on the bottom. We need the sole piece on the bottom. And that's okay, and that's how it's supposed to be. We're going to turn it inside out again. So just kind of flip it inside out again till that lining, the slipper sole, is now on the outside. Stick your hand in there and push out the seams and push out the toes and the heel. I bet you can't wait to get your foot in there, right? Go ahead and remove the safety pins. And go ahead and turn the other side inside out. So now that you have them turned inside out, we need to stitch the opening closed. The only thing left to do is to sew the opening closed. Take your needle and double thread it with some matching thread. And to make a knot at the end, a little trick is just to take the ends and pinch it between your forefinger and your thumb, wrap it around your pointer finger and roll it, and then pull. That will create a knot at the end. Open up the hole you left in the seam and take your needle and insert it underneath and the very end of that seam. Pull it tight. Fold the lining under, about 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, and then take a little stitch right next to the thread on the slipper. And then take a little stitch in the fold of the lining. So you're just going to be sewing those little stitches back and forth, alternating from the outside slipper edge to the lining piece. And you'll just be tucking and folding as you go. So little stitches back and forth. So just a slip stitch. And when you get down to the end, take a little stitch, wrap the thread around the needle a couple times, make a loop, and wrap the thread and then pull it. That'll make a knot. And then stick your needle in right close to the thread and then out. And then clip the thread. I hope this inspires you to look in your closet, go to the thrift store, or find some sweaters that you can felt and make a pair of cozy slippers. You got this. Go to my website, youmakeitsimple.com, for the pattern, the downloadable PDF, and you'll find other DIY projects, recipes, and other things on there as well. I hope you liked that tutorial. If you have any comments or concerns, leave them in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to be reminded when I put new things up, you just go into your notifications, click on that bell, and you're set to go. Thanks so much for watching. Have fun sewing, and we'll see you in the next video.